We now move to the next item of business on motion number 5550 in the name of John Swinney on the Budget Scotland No.2 bill. Can I remind members that time is very, very tight, so I am going to keep you to your time, and if you take interventions, then I'm afraid that I am going to be unable to offer you any additional time. I call on John Swinney to speak to move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, you've got 14 minutes.
Presiding Officer, the Budget Bill confirms the spending plans that are set out in the draft budget and underpins the approach this Government is taking to promote sustainable economic growth, improve public services and support families and businesses at a challenging time. I have engaged constructively with all parties on the contents of the bill, taking into account at all times the financial and economic context for this bill. We continue to face acute challenges to public spending in Scotland. Over 4 years, our budget has been cut by 8% in real terms, and within that, our capital budget has been reduced by over 25%. The resources available to me to address the issues raised by Parliament are therefore limited. The latest data shows that the Scottish economy returned to growth by 0.6% in Q3 of 2012. Unemployment continued to fall in Scotland over the September to November period, with a significant fall in youth unemployment. Combined with the encouraging news on growth in export sales, these figures demonstrate that progress is being made in delivering economic recovery. Despite this welcome progress, we are clear that more needs to be done. The Budget Bill seeks to accelerate economic recovery by creating jobs and supporting people into employment, particularly our young people, and by supporting Scottish business. The bill provides for the most competitive business tax regime in any part of the United Kingdom. It delivers on our commitment to a social wage at a time of significant pressures on household budgets, providing funding for key measures such as the council tax freeze, free personal care, free prescriptions and eye tests. And it takes forward an ambitious programme of public sector reform, together with our delivery partners, based on the 4 pillars of better partnership, working collaboration and local delivery, investing in the people who deliver our services, a public service culture that improves standards of performance, and crucially a decisive shift in favour of preventative spending. As part of that decisive shift, the Government is taking forward the 3 change funds that we announced in the spending review, worth more than £500 million over 3 years, including in early years. Later this year, the Children and Young People Bill will increase entitlement to early learning and childcare from 475 hours a year to 600 hours for 3- and 4-year-olds and looked-after 2-year-olds. These are significant proposals to expand provision, which sit alongside a range of other measures the Government is taking in this area, such as our investment in family nurse partnerships. Presiding Officer, the bill also maintains the Government's commitment to infrastructure investment. We are using every lever at our disposal to mitigate the impact of the severe cuts the UK Government has made to our capital budget. Planned capital investment in 2012-13 now stands at £3.1 billion, which is estimated to support more than 40,000 jobs across the Scottish economy. In 2013-14, that figure is planned to rise to £3.4 billion. Over 2012, 9 of the major infrastructure investment plan projects with a value of over £600 million were completed and are now in use. We are taking forward major infrastructure projects through conventional capital, such as the Forth Replacement Crossing and the South Glasgow hospitals. The total value of NPD projects, roads, hospitals, schools and colleges, that have entered procurement or have entered development through the hub is now around £1.6 billion, and we are on track to meet our target of delivering 30,000 affordable homes.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. On the NPD point, he keeps talking about procurement, but how much will actually be delivered on the ground next year for 13-14?
Cabinet Secretary.
What I said to Mr Brown in a couple of paragraphs before, I said that in 13-14 we planned the total amount of capital expenditure would rise to £3.4 billion in 13-14, which of course is based on a conventional capital budget of about £2.7 billion, the remainder coming from switching resource into capital, NPD and capital receipts. In total, using all levers at our disposal and through a range of mechanisms, our plans over the 3-year Scottish spending review period will support investment of more than £10 billion in the Scottish economy. It is with this strategic approach in mind that I have considered again what steps I can take to increase the impact of our capital expenditure programme. I have agreed with Scottish Water to reduce their drawdown of loans next year by £35 million, whilst maintaining their investment programme. Over the spending review period, we plan to invest over £400 million in renewable energy and low-carbon activity. In the short term, demand for financial support from the Renewable Energy Infrastructure Fund is lower than expected, and I intend to release £15 million in 2013-14 for other projects, whilst ensuring that funding drawn down from the fossil fuel levy surplus will still be deployed in full to support renewables projects. Our total capital budget has been cut by more than a quarter in real terms, but whenever we have had an opportunity to increase investment in housing, that is precisely what we have done, announcing additional investment of around £200 million over the past 12 months. The Deputy First Minister and I have agreed to build on this approach with additional investment split between several programmes and designed to achieve multiple objectives. We will invest a further £10 million in the Affordable Housing Supply Programme. We will invest £4 million in preventative adaptations, delivering vital improvements to existing homes. We will invest a total of £24 million in sustainability measures in the housing sector, namely an additional £10 million for the area-based National Retrofit Programme, £4 million to extend eligibility for the successor to the Energy Assistance Package, £5 million additional funding for the Greener Homes Innovation Scheme, and £5 million additional funding to bring new affordable homes to silver energy efficiency standard. These measures... I will do.
Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. These are measures which are going to be felt directly by families who are being hurt very hard by the cuts that we already have and the greater number of cuts that have to come. To avoid people taking out payday loans, he knows that I have favour an expansion of the credit union system. Can he do anything to kick-start that?
Cabinet Secretary.
In the last 3 years, the Government has supported credit unions to the tune of about £1.3 billion from the Just Enterprise programme. There are other funding streams that have been available to credit unions, and I expect there to be further measures available through the third sector funding arrangements that would be suitable for credit unions, and I recognise the long-standing interest that Margaret MacDonald has taken in these issues. The housing measures that I have announced today combined will deliver around 350 new social and other affordable homes, around 2,000 preventative adaptations, and it will deliver greater energy efficiency and carbon savings in 8,000 households across Scotland. Presiding Officer, this represents further substantial additional investment in housing, providing new homes and improving our existing stock, cutting emissions and supporting an estimated 800 jobs across Scotland with additional expenditure of £38 million. I can now tell Parliament that over the 3 years of the spending review, the total investment by this Government in housing supply will be some £859 million. If Mr Rennie will forgive me, I have quite a lot more ground to cover, and if a chance I'll give way to him later. Another significant contributor to economic activity is a balanced package of investment in public transport and roads infrastructure, helping business and the daily commute. Every £1 spent on road maintenance in Scotland provides a benefit of £1.50 to the Scottish economy. I therefore confirm today that I will invest an additional £10 million in trunk road maintenance in 2013-14 with direct economic impact. Presiding Officer, the Government strives to identify new and innovative means of driving recovery. I am therefore pleased to announce funding for 2 innovative policies which support growth. First, we will invest £2 million in a fund that will enable housing providers, whether public or private, to test out the development of affordable housing in vacant town centre properties. This ring-fenced competitive fund will help meet our commitment to deliver quality homes and bring empty homes back into use. It will also support key themes emerging from the Town Centre Review, helping to promote our town centres as attractive places to live and to work. Second, if Mr Baker will forgive me for a moment. Second, Scotland has a reputation for entrepreneurship and innovation in business, and we need to capitalise on these strengths. We established the Edge Fund to support small entrepreneurial Scottish businesses ready to grow but struggling to access finance. I have been struck by the large number of high-quality applications the Edge Fund has received, and I confirm to Parliament today that I will add a further £1 million to the EDGE Fund next year, doubling the amount the Government is making available to some of Scotland's most ambitious and creative entrepreneurs. I'll give way to Mr Rennie.
Willie Rennie.
I welcome the additional investment in housing. I think that's a welcome development. He referred to childcare and nursery education earlier on in his speech. I was giving him time to maybe explore the possibility of additional funding for that area, particularly for 2-year-olds. Is he minded to invest more in that area?
Cabinet Secretary.
As Mr Rennie knows, I've considered the points that he's advanced to me in these discussions, and my view is, given the financial pressures that we face, that the approach the Government plans to take with the expansion of childcare provision for 3- and 4-year-olds and looked after 2-year-olds is the right way to take that forward as part of the Government's early years agenda. Finally, Presiding Officer, the Government is taking forward an ambitious and necessary programme of post-16 education reform. Our objectives at the outset were for a system better aligned with jobs and growth, that improved life chances and that was sustainable for the long term. These reforms will ensure our college sector is able to deliver high-quality education, helping learners get the skills they need for jobs and taking account of the changing nature of the labour market. Those objectives will be met. They will ensure our colleges deliver an improved student experience, a better service for employers and long-term sustainability. We are also conscious of the need to help colleges maintain service for different learner groups, for example, women who want to return to work and those who wrestle with disadvantage. The Government is entirely committed to this process of reform and will ensure that it is implemented. Real progress has been made, and we welcome the positive engagement in the programme of reform from the college sector. So I announce today that the Government will make available the best possible deal we can for colleges. We shall provide an additional £10 million in 2013-14. That increase will establish the college budget at £522 million in the next financial year. Our plan for 2014-15 would see a further reduction in the college budget to £471 million. The Education Secretary and I want to give stability to our young people and colleges in the final stage of reform. I therefore confirm to Parliament that the college budget will be set in 2014-15 not at £471 million, not at £510 million, which was the highest ever figure before we came to office, but at a level consistent with 2013-14 at £522 million. This means £522 million of resource funding each year for the next 2 years, an extra £61 million over these 2 years, allowing Scotland's colleges to go forward with confidence and ambition to deliver the programme of reform. The Government will discuss with the Scottish Funding Council and the sector how best to deploy this funding in a manner that supports reforms and, through it, learners and employers. In providing this very significant additional support, the Government is building on the substantial steps we are already taking to support young people into employment through our Opportunities for All initiative and the abolition of tuition fees. At a time when we have a record number of Scots in higher education, when we are maintaining the number of college places, when we are investing millions in the college estate, when we are offering a record 25,000 modern apprenticeships a year, and when we are offering £61 million of extra funding for the sector, this Government is investing to deliver for Scotland's young people in the future. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has delivered a budget for growth. We are building on our original spending plans, having listened to the views of Parliament and the country, and are delivering extra funding for housing, creating jobs and cutting emissions, funding to regenerate our town centres, more support for entrepreneurship, investment in our trunk road network and a decisive further investment in our colleges. This is a budget bill that I believe deserves support from across this chamber, and I commend it to Parliament and to the people of Scotland.
Thank you. I now call on Ken McIntosh. Maximum 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And Presiding Officer, it's difficult to find the words to respond to John Swinney's budget bill this afternoon.
Order.
You think it's a game, laughing?
It's difficult, except to use the word disappointing. Disappointing.
Order.
This is a disappointing reaction. Yes, there have been a few announcements this afternoon, but if John Swinney expects the Scottish country to be grateful for the fact that he has not quite fully restored the cuts he made last year, then he's got another thing coming. Can I suggest, Presiding Officer, that anyone looking for something that will revitalise the Scottish economy, that will get businesses growing again, that will shake the lethargy out of this country that we need, that will provide the jobs and create the opportunities for young people that they are crying out for, they will have greeted John Swinney's words with dismay. There is nothing new here, nothing fresh. We are stuck with the same prescription the SNP have offered us for 2 years running. And for 2 years running, they have promised jobs and growth, and yet there have been no jobs and no growth. We know it's not working because the government's own statistics tell us it's not working. We know it's not working because construction is in decline, the economy is flatlining, and Scottish families across the country are feeling the squeeze. Even if we were to look at this budget simply as a way of ameliorating the worst of the Tory cuts, not as an engine for growth, it is doing nothing to protect the Scottish people. The most painful decisions have been left to be taken by public servants working in the front line in our health services or local authorities. The net effect will be the same: cuts to public services, fewer classroom assistants, carers with less and less time to spend with vulnerable elderly patients, and working families struggling with their pay frozen and the cost of living increasing. Scottish Labour did not ask for the earth. We did not indulge in backroom political horse trading or make unattainable demands. We had 3 simple asks. We had 3 simple asks on colleges, housing and rail. Straightforward and affordable demands that we believe would make a difference to people's lives and to the economy. On colleges, Presiding Officer, on colleges, in the midst of a recession that has seen Scotland return to unacceptable levels of unemployment that has hit the young particularly badly, I do not think it is too much to ask the Finance Secretary to restore the £35 million in cuts that he has inflicted on further education. Is it too much? Is it too much to expect our colleges to provide places for those seeking to retrain and reskill themselves to make themselves more employable in a difficult jobs market? We know that there are 70,000 less students attending Scotland's colleges since the SNP came to power. We know that despite the Cabinet Secretary and the First Minister's denials, that thousands more are being turned away from the colleges' places that could help them. John Swinney uses the word today additional to describe the £10 million he has provided. It is not additional. It is simply trying to ameliorate the cuts for which he is responsible. He dresses it all up in the language of reform, but it is not reform to turn people away from colleges. It is not reform to shut the door in young people's faces. Mr MacDonald.
Mark MacDonald.
Mr Macintosh will know that of the consequentials received by the Scottish Government, some £19 million is earmarked for the further and higher education sectors. Does he stand by his comments in the Stage 1 debate where he said that he would take that money back and allocate every single penny of it to the housing sector?
Ken Macintosh.
Well, Mr MacDonald should pay a little bit more attention to what I do say in this chamber rather than make up his own press releases. What I actually said...
Order.
Well, come on a second.
Order.
We have a Scottish Futures programme which supposedly was going to spend £500 million on capital projects, which have spent £20 million. And Scottish Labour have made it clear there is the capacity, the powers and the finance at the disposal of your Cabinet Secretary to fund all of those commitments and more. But on that part, on housing, one of the most important sectors in the economy in terms of sparking growth, creating employment and getting a country working again, as well as addressing a pressing social need, yes, why not use the full £350 million of net capital available to make a real difference, to inject some real energy into the market? Now, Mr Swinney clearly recognises he's got it wrong. He's clearly recognised that because in the last year alone, he has reversed his cuts 4 times and this morning 5 times. He's revisited this 5 times. How many times do you have to admit you're wrong? Why not just stand up here and say sorry? But why not do something more? Why not work with colleagues across this party, across this Parliament, who have ideas, who will make this economy work? Mr Swinney.
Cabinet Secretary.
Isn't the answer that Mr McIntosh is searching for the fact that this government puts forward a balanced budget that adds up, and what he is doing is trying to spend the same amount of money twice, which is what got the country into a mess under the stewardship of Gordon Brown.
Ken McIntosh.
Mr Swinney tries to make a virtue out of the fact that he fulfils his legal obligation to balance the budget. And then he has the nerve to talk about stewardship of the economy when he has presided over a country that's gone twice into recession, that is in the middle of the worst unemployment, twice into recession, and a budget he has delivered.
Order.
Well, the SNP clearly do not like to hear the truth when it's delivered to them. They clearly do not recognising the failure of their own actions.
Order.
A budget secretary who has promised a budget for jobs and growth and who has not made one shred of difference to the Scottish economy, where the Scottish economy has not improved, where the Scottish economy is exactly the same as the rest of the UK economy, and yet the Cabinet Secretary says he is making a difference with his choices. Can I just suggest, yet again, and remind the SNP that sometimes all they have to do is actually deliver on their own manifesto promises. Because it was the SNP who suggested that they would spend £1 billion on rail infrastructure delivering the Glasgow-Edinburgh Rail Improvement Project. Now, all we are suggesting is that you deliver on that promise, that you spend that money delivering jobs and growth and infrastructure to get people into work and get people to their jobs. That's a simple ask, and yet again, no more. Sit down, Mr Stewart.
Order.
If I thought there were any answers to be coming from the SNP backbenches, believe me, I would be absolutely delighted to hear Mr Stewart. 3 simple asks. 3 simple asks on colleges, on housing and on rail. They haven't come out of the blue. We haven't sprung surprises on the Cabinet Secretary. We've been arguing this case for over a year, and we've not been alone. We've been joined by the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, by the Scottish Building Federation, by the CBI, by Shelter and by colleges, exactly, by the National Union of Students. And we're not trying to create artificial or fictional divisions with the SNP. We're absolutely not. The point is that the SNP and Labour can actually agree that we do not agree that there should be an austerity approach. But we believe, Scottish Labour believe, that the Finance Secretary has the powers and he has the finance at his disposal to make a difference. And we believe that he's making the wrong choices with the powers at his disposal. We believe that instead of concentrating on the economy and on unemployment, he is content to sit back and blame Westminster for the cuts. Meanwhile, fobbing off the worst excess of his decisions on local authorities, letting our councils take the blame for his decisions. Can I just give one example? Just one example, Presiding Officer, of his approach, and that's the huge increase in the amount of severance and redundancy payments which the Scottish Government has presided over since they came to office. It's emerged that since the SNP came to power, it's allowed more than £600 million to be spent getting rid of people in the public sector. £600 million pushing people out the door when they should be finding employment for them. Can I just suggest that one of the most important policies that Labour have been promoting was a Scottish Future Jobs Fund, a wage subsidy programme, a flagship subsidy programme. And we were delighted when we heard John Swinney's announcement in September that he might be heading this direction. Can I suggest, Presiding Officer, I don't think it's actually asking a lot to have expected some detail on that programme between September and now. But what do we find? What do we find? Instead of 15 million on a wage subsidy programme, that figure is totally dwarfed by the amount of money he's paying out to get rid of people from the public sector. On colleges alone, when we are asking for 35 million in restoration of revenue cuts, we found out that he spent 41 million getting rid of staff and lecturers in our colleges. This government, all they do is they make a series of announcements and re-announcements of projects that aren't happening. Instead of shovels on the ground, we've got the laughable sight of the First Minister reading out project after project, none of which is actually being built, possibly in his imagination.
I'm afraid you must
If the
conclude.
SNP cannot make a difference using the powers of this Parliament, this truly is a disappointing budget, not just for us as politicians, but for every family looking for a job, for every business looking for growth, for the unemployed person looking for help. The illusion of independence has blinded the SNP to what they can do here and now, and I urge members to reject the choices made by Mr Swinney.
I remind members that the time in this debate is very tight. I now call on Gavin Brown with up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Well, I think this government was really summed up in the first 2 minutes of this debate, because when the debate started, there was building work going on quite happily outside. Within minutes of John Swinney opening his mouth, the building work had stopped. This is a government that has at its disposal £7 million more next year than it had this year. More money to spend in the next financial year than it had this year. So therefore, any cuts or changes that they make are political choices of the SNP. They don't like it, Deputy Presiding Officer, but with more money to spend next year than they have this year, the choices are entirely theirs. Let's look at where the savings, they say, have been made, because they say Scottish Water, through the great efforts of the Scottish Government, they've managed to get an extra £35 million out of Scottish Water. What they don't tell you, what you can only find in the small print, is that they actually gave an additional £50 million to Scottish Water this year through the Sleeper project. And in terms of the 14-15 budget, which they seem keen to talk about today, there's £190 million going to Scottish Water. They tell us they've saved money on renewables because demand is down, despite the fact that they have whinged and moaned month after month after month about renewables money being brought forward to Scotland. But when it actually happens, on the ground, they seem incapable of delivering. Now, let's look at the announcement on colleges, because this was a bizarre situation, Deputy Presiding Officer. An announcement of £10 million increase into the college budget for this year was made. Okay, there was a £34 million cut. They have decided to put £10 million back. What did we have? Spontaneous applause across this bit of the chamber for a £24 million cut to colleges. They will regret watching that back on television, I have to say, and I don't think there will be any spontaneous rounds of applause outside the chamber for a £24 million cut to colleges. Sure, happy to give way to Mr Mason. Isn't allowed to take part in the debate today, I'm told. He was bumped, but let's have an intervention from
John Mason.
Well, for his information, I'll tell him why I was clapping, and that was for the extra £51 million next year.
Gavin Brown.
Right, very good. We, I can see why he got bumped, Deputy Presiding Officer. So anyway, let's look on at housing that they talked about, okay? Because again, we boasted about all this additional money that is going into housing, but if you tot up all the money that went into housing in 11-12, including the transfer of management development funding, according to the Scottish Government figures, it came out at £360 million. Even if you add in the previous 4 tranches as they discussed, and the tranche today that they tried to make sound like 4 additional tranches, you're still around £300 million. That's still £60 million down compared to 11-12 for a budget that they claim is a priority. They asked to be judged, Deputy Presiding Officer, on what this budget did for the economy. Mr Swinney said that he would put every single additional pound that he could into the economy. But we see disappointing results in colleges we see disappointing results when it comes to housing, and we see more disappointing results when it comes to taxation. We have seen 3 strikes against the business community since this became a majority government: a retail levy, the empty properties tax, and a business rates burden that increases by 7% next year and then by 9% the year after. I'm very happy to give way to the Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Brown is moaning on about cuts in public expenditure. What precisely has Mr Brown got to say to the UK Government that's cut our capital budget by 25%?
Gavin Brown.
I have to say one there. To be accused of moaning by Mr Swinney about reductions in spending has a nice irony to it. But let us look at what the Scottish Government has done in response, because they're big. Presiding Officer, the vuvuzelas are in full flight this afternoon. If they would be quiet, I would quite happily answer the question put forward. The Scottish Government response to all of this is to set up the NPD programme to replace the PPP PFI programme that they decided to ditch. Now, they told us in year 1 they would spend £150 million, and they spent zero. This year, what about the 20 million? Yes, you're spending 20 million this year, but you told us you were spending 353 million when it came down to NPD. And then Mr Salmond, speaking from a sedentary position, has the audacity to talk about NPD when last week I asked him in this chamber not once but twice to give me a list of projects that have been delivered under NPD. Now, Mr Salmond gave me a list. He gave me a list of 15 projects, but the only problem, Deputy Presiding Officer, that none of those 15 projects had actually been built.
Mr Brown,
and we are struggling to find one that even has a brick on the ground. On that, I'm happy to leave it, Deputy Presiding Officer, and come to it again in closing. Thank you.
Thank you. We turn to the open debate speeches now. Speeches of 6 minutes at the moment. But if members have to be given extra time due to the fact that they can't be heard, then that may change. I'm going to call Bruce Crawford first, to be followed by Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At the beginning of my contribution to this debate, let me firstly recognise where the general agreement exists between the Scottish Government and the Labour Party. Not normal, but it does exist on this occasion, in this Parliament. Both the SNP and Labour generally agree that the UK Tory-led coalition have set about dealing with the serious economic challenges they face in a wrong-headed manner by cutting too fast and too deep. The impact of the UK's chosen direction sees the UK teetering on the edge of a triple-dip recession. The result? Prolonged agony for hard-working families trying to balance their household budgets, and the further stifling of hope for those seeking work. It is abundantly clear that the Chancellor's chosen direction is having the opposite effect to his stated aims. We only need to look at the most recent figures showing the UK economy shrank by 0.3% in the final 3 months of last year to see the evidence staring us in the face. By comparison, Scotland's Government has, of course, long been putting forward a consistent case for additional capital expenditure to help boost the economy and create jobs. As we all know, Scotland's First Minister initially called for an increase in capital spending in 2008 and has been repeating that call ever since. This call, though, was finally heeded by the Chancellor in his autumn statement when he announced an additional £331 million of capital spending, taking our cut down from 33% to 26%. Yes, a movement in the right direction, a welcome one, but in the teeth of the latest depressing GDP figures, too little, too late. The comparison between the dithering of the UK Government and the decisive action of the Government of Scotland could not be starker. In February 2012, the Government of Scotland announced a further capital spending package of £380 million until 2015, focused on housing, transport, health, digital and maintenance projects. In June 2012, the Government of Scotland announced yet another package of investment of £105 million for shovel-ready projects. And additionally, investment in infrastructure is being boosted through the much maligned by Gavin Brown £2.5 billion pipeline delivered through the non-profit distributing model. Also, crucially, despite having to take hard decisions, £700 million has been switched from resource to capital to support vital infrastructure projects. And only 2 weeks after, after the Chancellor's autumn statement, the Cabinet Secretary outlined where £205 of the £311 million of additional capital expenditure would be allocated. Gavin Brown.
Gavin Brown.
In relation to the revenue to capital switch that he has suggested, can he provide any evidence, A, that that has actually happened in practice, and B, what impact it has made?
Bruce Crawford.
The evidence is £3.1 billion of expenditure in this next financial year and 40,000 jobs across Scotland, Mr Brown. And today, after listening to what stakeholders have said and been telling them, the Cabinet Secretary has brought forward welcome additional capital expenditure in housing-related projects and £10 million for trunk road maintenance. So here we have the Government of Scotland listening and showing itself consistent and clear about what it wants to achieve in terms of creating jobs and growing the Scottish economy. In comparison, the approach of the Labour Party has been confusing at best and at worst deceitful. Yes, a strong description, but nonetheless accurate. During stage one, and confirmed again today, of the Labour stated position in regard to capital is that the entirety of that additional £311 million should be allocated to the housing sector. On the face of it, appearing to be a noble gesture in support of housing, but it didn't take long for people to recognise it was a cynical game of deception. Raising stakeholders' expectations of potential additional resources, but doing so in the sure and certain knowledge that the projections and proposals were undeliverable. Because by removing the £311 million in its entirety would mean millions and millions of pounds being cut from transport and regeneration projects, further and higher education, NHS maintenance, economic development, as well as many others, areas that the Labour Party have said are a priority for them. Now, the Labour Party's solution to all of this, of course, is to somehow pretend that all of that expenditure could be undertaken by the Scottish Futures Trust. No doubt from money grown on trees, because Labour refused to tell us which resource budgets would be cut in order to finance what would be additional capital expenditure of £331 million.
Last minute.
So, in conclusion, would the cash that Labour plans to come from, I'm in my last minute, you've already heard it, Mr McIntosh, and you've made a disgrace of yourself today. Absolutely. Would the cash from Labour's finance cuts come from education? Would it come from health? Would it come from local government? This Parliament and the people of Scotland deserve to know where the Labour axe would fall to deliver the hard choices that Joanne Lamont says she wants to take. But of course they won't tell us, because they're either too confused and don't understand the budgetary process, or more likely they're prepared to play a shabby game of deceit with the Scottish people. Well, I say that Scotland deserves better from the Labour Party, better from a Labour Party who claim they're better together with the Tories.
Before I call the next member, can I remind members that firstly, they should be speaking through the chair and not directly to each other from the benches, and secondly, that they should be watchful of the language they are using to each other. Elaine Murray, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Now, in the Stage 2 budget a year ago, I argued that spend on housing should be prioritised on the basis that it is preventative spend. The arguments for prioritisation have not changed. People living in inadequate, overcrowded or damp accommodation, or worrying about losing their home, will suffer from stress, will be more likely to suffer from physical and mental ill health, will perform less well at their work, and will be more likely to experience relationship breakdown. Children living in poor or temporary accommodation and witnessing the stress caused to their parents won't reach their potential at school. So stable, good quality housing is essential for people's well-being. And as we have all said, housing expenditure also helps the economy, creating employment and supporting the construction industry. And despite the importance of housing, the budget for affordable rented housing has continued to reduce. I know there have been 4 in-year revisions that added around £10 million in this current year back into the housing budget. We've now just heard about how a £10 million returned from a £46 million cut in next year's budget. SFHA stated in their briefing that the social rented housing sector has been unfairly penalised in this budget. Shelter state that with 157,000 households in Scotland on local authority waiting lists, the shortage of affordable rented housing is acute and the most urgent social problem facing us today. I know the Cabinet Secretary announced that £859 million will be invested in housing across 3 years, but that is still £531 million less than in the previous spending review. But the ability to construct socially rented housing isn't governed only by the total sum of funding available. For housing associations in particular, it's whether they're able to build affordable homes for rent with the level of subsidy currently available to them. I recently contacted all the housing associations in Scotland regarding their plans for building homes for social rent in the next 2 years, whether this had been affected by the reduction in subsidy, and how they anticipate welfare reform will affect both their organisations and their tenants. Now, without attributing comments to individual housing associations, I can assure you that the quotes I'm going to give you are genuine. And I would like to give the Chamber a flavour of the replies I received in the course of the past few days. One, because of the association's tight finances, it has ceased to build for the time being. No plans to develop any new housing over the next 2 years due to unsustainable levels of subsidy to develop new housing and the lack of affordable private finance. Until the last couple of years, we were active developers. We've had to review our strategic position and will not build any new homes in the immediate future. We expect to continue with our programme for the next 2 years, a bit better, but the position beyond that is uncertain. The reduction in HAG for the construction of social housing has resulted in a reduction in our programme by approximately 2/3. And we have no immediate plans to build new homes over the next 2 years due to subsidy cuts. The Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, in its news release of 21st of January, advised very well of their concerns, and I'll quote because it's better than anything I could say. Remains that the level of subsidy that is now available per new home, cut from approximately £70,000 per house to £40,000 per house on average, as this gives housing associations and cooperatives a real dilemma about how to use this money. Many of our members have used sites bought at low price or given free by local authorities, combined with their own cash reserves, to carry on building. But these options will run out. The only other option is to raise rents for tenant and to borrow more private money from banks. Sorry, I want to develop the argument. However, this hits the poorest in Scottish society at a time when welfare reform is already causing anxiety over issues like reduction in benefits for additional bedrooms and payment of direct benefits to tenants. Shelter also advised the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee that we are heading for a cliff edge with regard to new completions over the next few years. And I know that my colleague Richard Baker raised this concern with the Cabinet Secretary for Finance recently, but Mr Swinney didn't seem to believe that there was a problem and said that what the government was doing was driving up efficiency. I am asking the Cabinet Secretary to accept the evidence presented by the SFHA and by individual housing associations that they cannot sustain their socially rented building programme with the current level of subsidy. Most have used up their reserves of funds and land, and the bank account is not empty. But if you do not believe the housing associations, will you look at the figures which were released to me by the Housing Minister, which I referred to in my contribution on 20th of December, that housing starts, not completions, for homes for social rent decreased from 7,677 in 2009-10 to only 3,025 in 2011. And that coincides with the impact of the reduction in subsidy in 2011. Over the same period, the amount of grant funding claimed by the housing associations fell by something like 53%. With housing associations in some local authority areas claiming 10% or less compared to what they had claimed 2 years earlier. Surely this indicates that a problem is developing. In April this year, tenants and providers of socially rented housing will be hit by the bedroom tax. Tenants who are under-occupying will lose their housing benefit. Surely this is the worst time for housing associations to be unable to build new homes at affordable rent. And I am therefore using this opportunity to urge the Scottish Government to reconsider the level of subsidy offered to housing associations during these hard economic times.
Thank you. I now call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Michael McMahon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I begin by congratulating the Cabinet Secretary on once again ensuring a balanced budget which delivers for Scotland despite extremely difficult and uncertain economic conditions and continuing real terms reductions in the block grant from the UK Government. Managing Scotland's finances with care and competence has been a hallmark of the Scottish Government, gaining best value for taxpayers, focusing on economic growth, improving outcomes despite shrinking budgets and moving towards sustainability through genuine efficiency and a bold pursuit of preventative spending measures. All of this has been achieved whilst maintaining the social contract with the people of Scotland, freezing the council tax, abolishing prescription charges and reintroducing free higher education. Today's budget again focuses on the need to support fragile economic growth and the creation and sustaining of employment. Since 2008, the First Minister has called on Westminster to increase capital spending in order to boost economic growth. To their shame, these calls were ignored by successive Labour and coalition governments, resulting in thousands of Scottish jobs being lost whilst the economy slipped into a double-dip recession. Only in recent months has a penny finally dropped in London that increased capital spending and targeted infrastructure development as a way to pull the economy out of the mire. Nick Clegg has at last admitted the coalition got it wrong. Ed Balls, from the comfort of opposition, recently called for increased capital spending, even though we know in reality that his colleague Alistair Darling was planning cuts deeper and tougher than those of Margaret Thatcher. And even Boris Johnson has said that the UK Government must abandon its hair-shirt economic programme. For the Unionist opposition in this chamber to criticise the Scottish Government on a capital spending programme and efforts to boost the economy and create jobs, frankly beggars belief and exposes their bare-faced hypocrisy. The Chancellor finally recognised the need to increase capital spending and announced an additional £331 million of capital spending for Scotland. This improves matters to the point where our capital budget has still suffered a 26% cut over the spending period. Within a fortnight of the autumn statement, the Cabinet Secretary detailed how the majority of this money would be spent, including £50 million for housing, £22 million each for transport and regeneration, and £19 million for further and higher education. In his quite remarkable contribution during the Stage 1 debate, Ken McIntosh sprung on us the Labour's back-of-an-envelope position was to divert the entire £331 million of consequentials to housing. Whilst I do not agree with Labour, I am pleased to see at least some progress in economic maturity in terms of highlighting where they would make cuts. They now want £22 million diverted away from transport projects, £22 million diverted from regeneration projects, including £5.2 million investment in Irvine Bay Regeneration Company, including £2.5 million for a new health centre in Ardrossan in my constituency, as Margaret McDougall confirmed last month. Mr McIntosh.
Ken McIntosh.
Sir, does Mr Gibson accept that if the SNP government have not spent anything on their Scottish Futures Fund programme last year and have only spent £20 million out of the £353 million they were due to spend this year, there is abundant capacity on their NPD programme to make up that shortfall?
Ken Gibson.
D, as Mr McIntosh should know, is actually attached to projects, and therefore, and if he actually looked at the Scottish Futures project report which came out and was sent to his colleagues in the Finance Committee, would know exactly that that was the position.
Order.
I have to say, Mr McIntosh, I'm quite astonished that in your speech you didn't even mention the resource implications. Last month you said that money would be resources would be provided through underspend savings and efficiency, and Rhoda Grant went on to say that £200 million should be spent on fuel poverty alleviation, something which wasn't mentioned by you today. I wonder if she'll mention it today, and yet she was totally unable to say where that money could come from. Ms Grant.
What you haven't said is that it is Energy Action Scotland and the like that are pointing out that the government need to ensure at least £200 million spent on fuel poverty to reach their own targets. They are not pointing out how they're going to do that. And if the energy companies don't come up with their share, how is that gap going to be filled?
Well, I thought you might actually have come up with some of the solutions. I mean, you're supposed to actually be providing an alternative to the Scottish Government. You're utterly incapable of actually doing so. The Cabinet Secretary tried to engage with parties across the chamber to find common ground. Clearly, he wasn't able to do so, but he still was able to find £61 million extra for colleges over 2 years, £40 million for the housing budget, £10 million for investment in trunk roads. And as for the Tories, I know Gavin Brown isn't here, sadly, but how much worse would be in a position if Ruth Davidson, the temporary leader of the Conservative Party's policy, which she announced on the 6th of November last year, of reducing personal taxation by a penny in the pound, she actually said, "Oh, I want us to look further to see if it's all we can afford." I wonder what position we'd be in terms of our spending and investment programmes, given that every penny cut would be £559 million of the Scottish budget. Today, the Cabinet Secretary announced a well-rounded and dynamic budget to help grow our economy, improve living standards and create and sustain jobs. There is no doubt that while he remains hamstrung by the regressive and reactionary policies of the UK government that the Labour Party wants to run Scotland forever, it appears, we will never reach our full potential as a nation. This Parliament desperately needs the ability to control Scotland's resources and finances fully to secure our future prosperity. Nevertheless, today's commitments to increase NHS budgets, additional house building projects, a boost in infrastructure spending, improved college funding settlements and a continued commitment to early intervention and preventative spending measures are most welcome and will make a positive difference to the lives of tens of thousands of Scots. This budget will help protect Scotland's fragile economic recovery during tough economic times, maintains a social contract with the Scottish people which Labour have abandoned, and protects the universal services that Scots expect and deserve. Support the budget.
Thank you. I now call Michael McMahon to be followed by Aileen MacLeod.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. There is no doubt that when the SNP has been speaking on this budget, they've certainly and consistently tried to convey a sense of optimism about its capacity to generate growth in the economy. Listening to Mr Swinney and his colleagues promoting their conviction about this budget, I am, however, reminded of Voltaire's view that optimism is the obstinacy of maintaining that everything is best when it is actually worst. I will not rehearse the arguments that I made at stage one, that there was no support provided to the Finance Committee by witnesses, which would allow the Government to maintain its proclamation that this is a budget for growth. Rather, I will try to convey my own example of why I believe there is such a gap between what the Government asserts and the reality of its failure to deliver. Back in my office in Bellsill, I keep a glossy brochure produced around 2006 by Transport Scotland. In that brochure, there is a timetable for the construction of the M8 to Baillieston Newhouse upgrade, the Raith interchange reconstruction and the M74 Raith to Maryville expansion plan. The first of these was to start in 2009, the second in 2010, and the interrelated programme in its entirety was projected to be completed in 2014. Yet here we are in the second month of 2013, and the only sign of these construction schemes, now known as the M8 bundle, remains that sleek Transport Scotland booklet. Companies which have located in the local area remain poised, if not suspended, in anticipation of the benefits that are predicted to accrue from this much vaunted but delayed enhancement to the motorway network in the heart of Lanarkshire. And here we are, approaching 4 years after the projects were supposed to start, and we are subjected to nothing more than the bloated boasts of the Government and the SFT that these road projects will be ready to start in 2014, the year that they were due to finish.
Bruce Crawford.
This is incredible. The member talks about the bloated SFT, and yet his front bench wanted to use it in some sort of way to cover up their inadequacies in their budget numbers. Yeah. Quite remarkable.
Michael McMahon.
What's more remarkable is that Bruce Crawford still refers to the SFT as if it was the money, when actually what the SFT is a body set up at a huge cost to spend money which it doesn't have. So it's even more laughable is the claims of the First Minister and his government that these works are part of a £3 billion infrastructure contract list which is already with us and is in this budget. If we're not so sad that construction companies, and more importantly those they employ, know that this work should already be in progress, it would be hysterical. These projects are not so much shovel-ready as shovel-rusty, as the tools lie around waiting on this government to pay someone to pick them up. Construction output in Scotland saw an estimated fall of 13% in 2012, meaning that the sector will remain in recession even as the wider economy sees some signs of life. Estimates of the sector indicate that despite the 1.1% growth predicted over the next 4 years, employment will fall by around 1% in the same period and is only expected to stabilise around 2016-17. Economists assessing the capital investment in Scotland expect a fall in growth and employment for the sector, and are attributing this to the scaling back of the government investment in housing and also spending on public non-housing projects such as the building of schools and hospitals. This reduction in investment is likely to see a decline of 3.5% in the public non-housing sector in the period up to 2017. Add to this a public housing sector which is also likely to contract by 0.4% over the same period, and we can anticipate a 58% drop in Scotland's forecast annual recruitment rate the requirement for construction. Now, I am happy to commend the Cabinet Secretary for retaining his commitment to training and upskilling. We have to ensure that as industry crawls back from the recession, it is prepared and ready to cope with the increased level of demand. If that commitment to producing the skilled workforce we need is to be more than rhetoric, though, then we need to see a reversal of the disastrous cuts planned for the education sector. That sector best placed to provide the practical skills industry sectors, especially construction, with what they will need. At best, therefore, and taking an optimistic perspective on what it contains, this has been a very benign budget. Yes, there were huge challenges to be met because of the cuts coming from Westminster, but rather than rise to meet the challenge, Mr Swinney has played safe. He has protected the headline-grabbing populist policies, which, while bringing short-term electoral success to his party, have diverted resources away from the long-term, sustainable spending that Scotland needs at this time.
Last minute.
You could be forgiven for thinking that this budget is not actually designed to meet the current economic needs of Scotland, but one which lays the foundations of the more munificent budget that the SNP government is preparing to deliver just before the referendum. So while protecting the SNP's short-term ambitions, he has sought to blame Westminster for the failure of Scotland's economy to grow. What he has forgotten is that when you spend your time blaming others, you give up the power to change things yourself. And there is no strategy for change. There is little prospect for the investment in the right areas of the Scottish economy that we need from this budget if growth is actually to manifest itself as a result of the budget. So, having forgone the opportunity to do what's right by the Scottish economy, the Government has also forfeited the right to have our support for this budget.
Thank you. I now call Aileen MacLeod to be followed by Willie Ray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome the chance to participate in this afternoon's debate to support a budget that is focused on jobs and growth that makes the right decisions in very difficult economic times. And I want to begin by congratulating the Finance Secretary for producing a budget that demonstrates this Government's steadfast commitment to protecting the NHS, even in these difficult times, and in the face of changes to the wider welfare system imposed on Scotland by a Tory-led government in Westminster that are certain to increase inequality in our society, including in health, and damage the lives of the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. Now, in this budget, the Scottish Government honours its pledge to protect health spending for the whole of this spending review period. Health boards will receive above-inflation increases in funding in the next 2 financial years, just as they have done on the previous 2, while NHS workers will benefit from the lifting of the public sector freeze with a 1% increase for the lowest paid in 2013-14. This Government is keeping its promise to pass on the full Barnett consequentials for health. By 2014-15, the resource budget for health will be more than £1 billion higher than it was in 2011. And at the same time, £390 million will be invested over the next 4 years in improving NHS buildings and equipment, and an additional £10 million announced by the Finance Secretary last June will be allocated to additional maintenance spend next financial year, rising to £25 million the following year. Now, this budget, Presiding Officer, also reflects the SNP Government's commitment to increasing and investing in preventative actions and early intervention, a commitment that will not only improve the quality of life for many Scots, but will reduce the actual long-term demands placed on our NHS. This budget will allow the NHS to continue to deliver the Detect Cancer Early Initiative for early detection of breast, bowel and lung cancer. It continues the £80 million Change Fund supporting the integration of adult health and social care, crucial to achieving better and more sustainable public services over the longer term. And it will allow the Early Years Collaborative to deliver on the priorities of the Early Years Task Force. It will deliver the Family Nurse Partnerships programme to first-time parents under the age of 19, and it will make further investment in dementia services. In addition, we will also be aware of announcements since the budget statement, including the additional £1 million to recruit more A&E consultants, backing up our A&E action plan. Presiding Officer, this budget is therefore a budget for the better health of the people of Scotland, for now and in the future. Investment in capital projects also continues in spite of Westminster's cuts of 26% to Scotland's capital budget, and forecast to reach 33% in real terms by 2014-15. From major projects such as Dumfries and Galloway's Royal Infirmary in my own region to the smaller projects such as a new health centre in Dalbeattie, 10 years in the making, but absolutely vital to the people who have waited for it. This government is continuing to invest in modern facilities which are equal to the clinical challenges of the future. And such activity creates jobs, it boosts the economy and it helps economic recovery. And prioritising our NHS, as successful NSP governments have done, is paying real dividends for the ill and infirm in our society. Hospital-acquired infection rates have fallen by more than a third. Premature mortality rates from cancer have fallen by 6% since 2007, by 27% for coronary heart disease and 19% for deaths from stroke. Of course, these results are testament to the magnificent work that's done day in, day out by our NHS staff. Presiding Officer, as a member of the Health Committee of this Parliament, I make no apologies for fully endorsing the budget before us today. It is a budget not only designed to protect Scotland's NHS from the Westminster cuts and the cuts that we know the Labour Party here would impose if ever returned to government in Scotland. It goes much further. It is a budget that continues this government's pledge to invest in the future of our NHS and, in doing so, to invest in and improve the lives of future generations of our citizens. In health, as in all other aspects of this budget, the SNP government is once again renewing and reinvigorating the social contract that we struck with the people of Scotland when we came to power in 2007, a contract at the heart of which is an unwavering commitment to social justice, including, I might add, an unwavering commitment to a social wage, part of which includes universal service provision and which is now being abandoned by the Scottish Labour Party. Now, through this budget, the Finance Secretary is continuing the journey to delivering a better and more sustainable NHS that the SNP government embarked upon in 2007. But the stark reality is that this journey cannot be completed until and unless our government has a full range of powers over the provision of care and welfare that only independence will bring. In 2014, people of Scotland will have the opportunity to allow us to complete that journey by voting yes. It's an opportunity I believe they will take. In the meantime, I will urge our opposition colleagues across this chamber to support the government's budget for jobs and growth this afternoon.
Thank you. I now call Willie Rennie to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
I get amused by speeches like that who condemn the Westminster government for being mean and cutting funds to the Scottish Government, but then celebrate the levels of investment in the NHS. It is the Westminster Government that's making those decisions on the NHS, not the SNP. I have found, however, on a note of consensus, that this budget process, is an open and conclusive one. I think John Swinney and myself, we can work together. We can discuss priorities for Scotland. I hope he shares my ambition of building a strong economy in a fairer society so that people can get a chance to get on. That's why we picked two priorities in this budget process, realistic priorities. Firstly, on colleges. Last year we made, I think, quite a bit of progress, reversing the £40 million, feels like billion, £40 million cut to the college budget. This year our ambition was to restore the £35 million cut. That cut would have had significant effects on our colleges who are going through a period of reform. Expecting them to reform at a period of contraction is very difficult, a very difficult thing to expect them to do, especially when we're trying to train people of all ages, not just young people, but people of all ages, for the skills that they need to fill the jobs that we're working hard to create. Which is why I found it astonishing there was celebration on the benches, the SNP benches, when a cut of £25 million was announced. That's nothing to celebrate. £10 million was nothing compared with the £35 million cut that was planned, and I find that really, really disappointing. The second priority was on, not just now, the second priority was on nursery education. Mr Swinney's heard me repeatedly say that we want 2-year-olds, 40% of them ideally, to get 15 hours a week of nursery education. Now, in England, 40% are going to be getting it, starting in September. Now, many people, including Professor James Heckman, has cited this as a great investment to make. Make an investment before the age of 3 has the best educational returns. Now, in Scotland, we're only going to get 1%, and today's budget hasn't changed that 1 inch. 24,000 of the poorest 2-year-olds in Scotland would have got 15 hours of nursery education a week. Now, we recognise that money's tight. We recognise that finances are difficult. But we were able to identify where the money would come from to invest in these areas. That's why I'm really disappointed that John Swinney didn't take up our offer. Now, he cites the family nurse partnerships. Now, the family nurse partnerships are not unique to Scotland. They are happening in England as well. What is unique to Scotland is that only 1% of 2-year-olds are going to get the nursery education that 40% of 2-year-olds in England will get. Scotland has been left far behind. I think James Heckman will be disappointed by the decision by the SNP government today. Certainly.
John McAlpine.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the intervention.
Can we have John McAlpine's microphone, please? John McAlpine.
Yes, I understand that Professor Heckman was talking about quality early years education, and given that his colleagues in the South are increasing the ratio of children to carers, would you not agree that it's better to have high quality early years care? And it's generally understood that the care in Scotland is higher quality than that in England and Wales.
Molly Rennie.
I'm not quite sure where she got that fact from. If she would check the announcement, if she checks the announcement, what that's actually doing is increasing the standard of education for nursery teachers, not decreasing it. She should go back and check her facts, because 1% in Scotland is not an improvement on 40% in England. I think it's a real disappointment that the SNP has not really stepped up to the plate. The experts have clearly said that this is a good investment. Many backbenchers on the SNP signed the motion. In fact, members from all parties in this Parliament signed the motion. Many of them are here today, but yet they were applauding that budget. Now, 40% is what we should be aiming for. 1% is what we're getting. 24,000 2-year-olds are being let down by this budget today. James Heckman will be disappointed. John Swinney should be disappointed by this budget. I'm certainly disappointed. I thought we could work with John Swinney today and come up with an agreement. We came up with an agreement last year where we worked together, not just now, last minute. We worked together last year. We got more money for the colleges. I would have hoped we could have worked together again today, at least for the 2-year-olds, because they deserve it. They deserve this kind of investment. And it wasn't an unrealistic plan that we had forthcoming. We had a plan that would set out the investment. We were going to phase it up until 2016. We had the plan. Now, John Swinney has time to reverse this. He can work to make a commitment for 2-year-olds. If he seriously considers that what we need to do is change the generational, the life chances of these young people, he should turn back and turn back now.
Thank you.